Welcome everyone to the Colloquium. Yeah, we're very happy to have you here today to talk about conserving and preserving Steina's work. And this program has been a collaboration between the Vasulka Chamber at the National Gallery of Art, the Vasulka Foundation, and the Vasulka Kitchen Brno. And I will just give some introductions to the speakers and then outline the program and the objective for this conference. But the reason that we wanted to have a roundtable is because we'd like to encourage participation in this session, because all thoughts are welcome. So I'll start by introducing the panelists. Kristin Skeving is the director of the Listasafn Íslands Museum in Hveragerði. She's also co-founder of the Vasulka Chamber in 2014 with then museum director Halldór Runolfsson, and as maybe one of the people who's been most important in preserving Steina's legacy and making sure that it has been on view and that the archives have gone to safe places and have been interpreted well. She is a visual artist in addition to being a curator and a museum director. Jennifer De Felice, Helia De Felice is an artist, an educator, and curator specializing in the field of technology, who has long asserted her valuable artistic sensibility in pedagogical and curatorial practice and in co-curating concepts of artistic events and institutions. She is a founder of the Vasulka Kitchen Brno Center for New Media Art, a legacy project and a cultural platform devoted to electronic art pioneers Woody and Steina Vasulka. Chris Hill is a curator and has taught at Cal Arts and Antioch College. She received her MFA from SUNY Buffalo and was video programmer for Hall Walls in Buffalo for over a decade. She curated Surveying the First Decade, Video Art and Alternative Media in 1996, distributed by the Video Data Bank. And she's represented in this exhibition with the navigational tool for navigating the Vasulka Mediascape, which is just outside of the gallery. And following this session, you will all be able to have a preview of the exhibition. It's not finished yet. There are a few graphic panels that have to go up before the opening at 2 p.m., but we're almost there. Gabi Wiezers is founder and director of Lima in Amsterdam. Previously was the coordinator of collection preservation and related research at Montevideo. I can't read these letters. What'd you say?
I don't know what's in your text. I did never read my bio like this. It's related research at Montevideo Time-Based Arts Netherlands Media Art Institute and previously the Theatre Institute, both in Amsterdam.
Thank you. Thank you. Joey came all the way from Los Angeles via London. Yes, via London. He is he's head of digital preservation and time-based media at LACMA. And that's correct. Yeah, and Sigurður Traustason is head of research and collections at the Reykjavik Art Museum. So we're here to talk from the various perspectives of archivists, curators, foundation heads, and preservationists. And I think the objective for today is to just come out of this meeting with a better understanding of what we can do cooperatively and individually to preserve Steina's work. I know, speaking for the National Gallery, we have the Vasulka Chamber archive, but we would like to be able to do more to make sure that Steina's work and Woody's work are on view more often in our museum, that we continue to preserve and interpret that work, that we make the archive a welcoming place for researchers and scholars, and you know, and eventually, I think, do more with our website to make that a site where people can come and look at the works that are in our collection, and do a better job than we have been, but you know, of showing the different iterations of the works we own, documenting that, so that when people are interested in borrowing a work or learning more about it, they can see the different iterations that a work like Borealis has had over time. So I think, without taking up too much more time, I will turn it to who's next.
I guess I'm next. Okay. So thank you, Pari, for the introduction. And yeah, I just wanted to say I'm very grateful that we could do this colloquium here in the context of Steina's exhibition. It's really important to have these partnerships, and if there was something that Woody and Steina Vasulka were good at, it was bringing people together. And they were also, as Chris Hill mentioned yesterday, they were extremely generous in sharing their work, and also sharing the genealogy of their work with with researchers, with people who are interested in working with their archive. So I think that that's an important thing to really bring up here, is that this was an important aspect of their lives, is bringing people together and working together. I also wanted to mention that I had a session, an online session with Gabi, where we were talking about archiving ephemeral work and new media work, and I said, yeah, so, you know, the question was sort of how, and Gabi said, well, there's no one answer. And I think that's important to also keep in mind. Yesterday also, Siga Regina, who was talking about iterations and archiving, and you know, after the talk we said, well, it's interesting that a lot of times the search for answers actually just leads to more questions. So yeah. So the goal, I think, here today, as Pari mentioned, is to explore some of the territory, some of this territory that many of us have already explored, and to think about the genealogy and the iterations of Steina's work, which can lead to strategies and approaches, and hopefully, eventually, best practices. I did want to show two short clips of Steina talking about some of what we're speaking about here today. Two of these clips are from interviews that were done between 1996 and 1998 by Aaron Davidson and Melissa Dubbins. And these interviews are available online at the website vasulkainterviews.org. So I have to go to the computer, but I'm going to show two short clips.
Early rejection of us as artists. Yeah, but this is not art kind of thing. We always thought it was art by the lack of being anything else, but it doesn't matter what it is. It's an activity. So we haven't been actually in any close encounter with art until very recently, like in the last 4 or 5 years. And it is very problematic because we find the artwork to be very rigid and preconceived. But you know, when people come into a museum, I go to a museum myself, and if people come and see our work, it's just as good form as any other, or art gallery. But we have never sought them. We've always sought rather warehouse spaces, alternate spaces, and we are much more comfortable culturally in that environment. Multiple channels. So I consider having gone back to multi-channels from what I started with. But there isn't a compromise, at least for me. I mean, every single tape has to be as good as I can make it. And must be, I don't fall on this idea, oh well, I can cheat a little on this because once it is seen on 3 channels, nobody will notice. Or nobody will know that there is a flaw here and glitch there. I never do that. It is a kind of obsessiveness to do everything as perfect as possible. And to think that maybe somebody would look
I can't have them. So, but then, of course, it is true that you can cover up a lot by making it an installation. It is a more forgiving form, and you get away with things, but also you get additional play out of everything, because I consider making those things a play, a kind of a permission to play like a child. And now you come to installation and you get another opportunity. The only problem is that the institutions are not very interested in you playing. They say, here's the room, where is your drawing? And I say, I don't have any drawing, I'm going to see how it looks in there. Yes, but is it going to be this way or that way? And finally, I decide that this is the way the installation is going to look. And they come in and they draw it up. And they measure everything and they draw it up and they make like a hard copy and say, this is how it is going to be from now on. And that horrifies me, because every single space is different. I usually show pieces before I finish them. And even if I have finished the piece before I show it, I never ever tell anybody that this is the first time it is shown. I've never said this is premiere, or I have never shown it to an audience before. I sneak them in, like, oh yeah, and here is this piece, and and then I get some kind of a funny feedback, and it is not necessarily the feedback that people say, this is good, this is bad, but when you watch your tapes with audience, you somehow start seeing it with their eyes, and they tell you things that you hadn't realized before. So the idea of when my work is finished is sort of also for that reason nebulous, because I like to go back and change it and play around with it some more.
So it's me then, or are you going to say something?
No, but I just thought it would be interesting to hear Steina's words about installing and her approach and interest in the relationship between her work and the institution. So yeah, and I would like to pass the microphone to Christine Skeving, who will talk a little bit more about some of the important aspects of Steina's work, and maybe also some personal story about discovering or finding Steina's work.
Hi, I'm really pleased to be here. It's a pleasure to meet all together to talk about this, because I couldn't be happier that we just had her voice just there, because that's, I think, often is forgotten when people are talking about not only her work, but video artist and installation artist, because it's like they are supposed to fit in one box, and as we just saw, that's not the case. I found Steina, of course, when I was an art student. Probably many of you know this story. Fell in love with Borealis at ZKM and found out then that she was Icelandic, and started this kind of long-term relationship that I'm still in with her. What I started out loving about her was this experimental way of thinking, and it's never like an end result. And this is, of course, because now I'm a museum director myself, and I know this is a problem for us working in institutions, that we need to have, like Vasi was saying, how is it going to be when we work with artists? But I think maybe when I'm working with artists, because I am an artist myself, I'm so much more freer in the way I think with artists, and I know that they have talked about it when they work in my museum, that they feel a feeling of total freedom, because I understand the need, like Steina, probably because I worked with Steina for so many years. It doesn't have to be the way it was before, and I'm a bit worried. And I'm just, it's maybe like a, I don't know, like a difficult tone I'm going to put here, but I'm very thrilled to see this exhibition here and in the Reykjavik Art Museum. But I'm also a bit worried how it's been presented, because it's like all the things that Steina has told me over the last 20 years not to do. Like seeing Lilith squeezed in a little tiny screen makes me, she's like a fire lady, she should not be in a tiny little monitor. But I mean, I understand this is a process of many institutions working, but I feel like it's really important that we meet today, so we cannot say that this kind of exhibition that is happening here in the Reykjavik Art Museum is the only way to show Steina's work in the future. And it's really, really important for me that this is also being filmed, because I know yesterday when I went, or the day before, that Steina, she commented on many things. She wouldn't probably say it publicly, but for her, many of the decisions that have been made for these two exhibitions, she would not want to do it herself today. So I think it's really good that we have this conversation today, and I'm sorry, but I'm very pleased with this exhibition. Please don't get me wrong, and I'm so thrilled that this is happening. But it's just very important that this is not like she just said herself, now this is the way to do it forever, because that's not the case. And I've had many conversations with other museum directors and curators that are very firm about, this is the way to present Steina and Woodi's artwork. So I just said Lilith because I find Lilith should be huge, just because of the stories of Lilith. Machine Vision, I mean, it's lovely to see it here as close as it was when they put it together. But I think the presentation that we've done recently is much more stronger than this way. And Steina agrees. But I think for the audience, it's really important to see it. Yeah, this is how it was put first because of the equipment that Steina could have at that time. But she was so happy. She's always like, bigger screens, can have the best screens, can have the, can have the warp screens. So I think we need to understand that someone who's so interested in technology like they were, both of them, we have to let them flow with technology. We cannot keep them in a can that was made in 1970. So I don't know if I should stop here because I want to have this conversation with you, I know. I was thinking so much about it yesterday. I even, was almost making like a PowerPoint presentation, but it should be a really nice conversation that we're having today, and hopefully Steina will come in. But of course she might not, she doesn't really want to have a confrontation either. So she will just say, this is great, but then she will be like, oh, but why did they do this, and why they did not listen to me about that, and so I know the people who have been working with her for a long time know how she is. So I don't know if is Chris the next one to talk, or Gabi. Okay, but we will continue this.
You could also see these great exhibitions as a momentum, and see that the show in the States, the show here, the shows here, the show in Germany, and see what the differences are in presenting the work, and then maybe let Steina one-to-one reflect on it and use that for further exhibitions of her work. Because I think it's the most challenging thing is to figure out how would a work evolve, and how can we imagine, we are not the artists that made the work, we are the caretakers, we are the assistants, the technicians, the helpers, to figure out how the artists would think of the work to evolve, and they need to be evolve. I was supposed to talk about violin power as a case study. I made some slides, but it's just, in Dutch we say an umbrella, to have something to show. We have a long history with the Vasulkas, and if I say we, I mean Montevideo. Montevideo started in the 70s, and René Coelho and Livinus van der Bunt at the time, they founded Montevideo, and I think late 70s, early 80s, at least a lot of events in the 80s happened in collaboration with the Vasulkas, presenting the works, but also they came over to do workshops and so on. And later on, maybe, yeah, okay. Ah, yes. Now I have to synchronize, so let's see how to do it. Okay. Oh, you did synchronization. Okay, then go ahead. Please do. Okay, you see the guys, these are Livinus and René. And in the corner, you see the Vasulkas, one of the workshops, one of the interviews. I was very pleased that yesterday the video clips had all the Dutch subscription. There are many interviews made at the time and many movies. And if you go to the next slide, then we can go. Last year I did a presentation at the Vasulka Kitchen in Brno and looked at the notes, my old notes from 20 years ago, where we presented geomania. We did a case study into how to present geomania at the time. There was a lot of information online and available from the Vasulka Foundation, many other places, where there was a rather precise description how the work should be presented. And then you saw it being presented in a different way everywhere. And Ramon and I traced the different presentations and showed the work in Marseille, where we met Christine as well. Yeah. Since then, we didn't continue the research in this case study. So that means the case study is outdated. It's 20 years ago. The technology evolved, the work evolved. So at that time, we didn't think of big projections or big screens without a frame in a room where you can walk through. But nowadays, it's presented like that. Just to highlight that preservation is not a thing you do now and then it's done. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, it's also evolving and has to be a continuous process. And maybe the most important word in this sentence is the word process. If we go to the next, then you see the process-based is for media art in general, it's about process. So we are now, how many years later? 25, 24 years later. In 2000, this was really mind-breaking. That it's not so much materialized-based or object-based, but it's very much about evolving and changing. And still I work a lot with conservators, with a lot of museums where the trained conservators are dealing with objects and statics and want to frame it, where in the media art world, it's not like that, as Jennifer told. We had an exhibition. Yeah, please go to the next slide, it's fine. We had an exhibition in mind. Let me tell you that violin power is considered, how should I say, it belongs to the Dutch canon of digital artworks. Part of it is developed in the Netherlands, and we wanted to honor Steina with this. We presented a year ago or so a large exhibition with the Dutch canon. It was called Reboot, Pioneering Digital Art. And we looked at what do we want to present. I want to highlight with this like a difference between preservation and curating, or maybe the similarities, or it's an interesting topic, I would say. At one hand, all the documentation, all the research you can consider to be conservation. In this case, we have the video recording of the experiments from the 70s, but actually we wanted to present the live version in the exhibition, and we were wondering how we could do so. And of course, with many of these types of works, it's a super challenge and almost impossible, or many different forms how to do it, you could say as well. If you go to the next. Yesterday we talked a lot already about the work, so I'm not going to explain the work. But of course, what is the work and what is the different hard and software components and how to activate it and many other challenges. You are all aware of these challenges, so I won't highlight them, but if you go to the next slide, then you see how we normally address it. If you're super interested, there is a case study done, really precisely mapping out the technology used in the different iterations. And I can give you access to it. So this is the video recording from the 70s, where there are different versions, but then the different versions of this video are like in length. There are minutes difference, or they are of course in like formats, but basically it's quite static. If these files are well preserved and taken care of and monitored and so on, then that's fine. But then of course it's about how to present that. Do we present it on a monitor? Do we present it on a big screen? Or do we present it in a different way? If we go to the next, then there is like the mapping of the timeline of the file in power performance. And we had long conversations about the authenticity of each version. With an iteration, what is authentic is often the question, or what is the authentic version? We consider every version to be authentic. So it's in Dutch we say it's an open door. You can step in. It's every version has its own authenticity. If you go to the next, this is how, at the end, how we presented the work. So we presented the video. We were not able to lay our hands on the instrument. We also were not able to preserve the software or the instrument as such. It's still with Steina. But what we did, we want indeed to also express the artist's voice, and made a clip that was presented next to the work. So maybe, yeah, maybe show a bit of the clip. And of course, this is connected to what Kristin just said, that often in the exhibitions, and what we talked about yesterday as well, how much the audience nowadays is informed about what they see. Do they? No, just start it and let's do 1 minute or so, and then it should.
Yeah, now before Violin Power, Woody did the tape called The Matter, and it was about the sine wave, because by that time we had realized that we were dealing in waveforms. The signal was waveform, and waveform was amplitude and pitch. So that was a progress again, and Woody made this tape called The Matter, which was just about the waveform, which was a sine wave. Sine wave is kind of a super waveform out of which all other waveforms come. And later, when I hooked my violin into the audio synthesizer, that's precisely what I got, was a sine wave. And that confirmed why I have chosen the violin, because the violin generates a pure sine wave.
Thank you. It's worth to watch the whole video. It's in the archive here. Just to express that at one hand you can meticulously lay out all the differences in documentation, in iterations, but I consider it to be the best to have a discussion with the artist. What are the foci points and how should it function, and many other questions that are around. The archive is often, the works are considered to be like documentation is considered to be looking back. But of course, it's also looking forward, how to use it, how to perform the archive, or how to invite others to make new works. So Jennifer, if you show the next slide, the next 10, I would say, yeah. There's also a whole program reperforming iconic works by other artists. So this is Emil Ziele. He did a reperformance of a Dan Graham piece. Joost Rekveld did a reperformance of the Vasulka piece. This is, in my experience nowadays, a very fascinating way how to connect young artists often with the work, how to translate it to a new technology, and how to have this conversation. What are the key parts of the work? How can it evolve? And what is the core? And so we do a regular program in inviting these artists and students. I'm not sure there's another slide, but I was looking in my notes from the, let's see if I can find them. In my notes from the case study that we did a couple of years ago related to the, maybe, otherwise I have to, oh yeah, I prepared this morning, but now, of course, it's somewhere else. Yeah. We always work, Lima always works collaboratively. There are so many different archives related to the Vasulka. Every place where they presented the work might have something super interesting in their archive. I always try to open up our research to the others. This is a do-it-yourself, a sharing approach, maybe from the 70s, but it's very valid right now as well. So I would everyone encourage to do so. And indeed, today we're also here to share and to see how to get to next level in giving access to all the work that is done and all the work that we want to do. So far, so good. Chris, do you take over or who does take over?
I actually want to pick up a little bit on what Gabi was saying about preservation and curating. In the mid-90s, I was invited to put together an exhibit or a collection that became Surveying the First Decade, Video Art and Independent Media in the United States, 1968 to 1980. And it's a 17-hour collection of work divided into 8 programs. And I spent a couple years researching this. Okay, and it turned out, which we didn't realize at the beginning, that we were doing this project on the cusp of the shift from analog to digital. So when I started researching, I was dealing with analog media in various collections, including in artist collections. And one of the big problems was that I was interested in actually looking at some work that had been done on half-inch open reel. So that was a big issue because a lot of that work had not been preserved, but maybe it had been talked about. So, that was a big deal. What I didn't realize was how soon everything would become digital. The data bank didn't think about this either, really. And then when we were getting close to finished, we realized that because we had to preserve the work and put it in a form that could be distributed, we realized that a lot of the work that we had included from the early 70s especially
if it hadn't been preserved, might be lost forever. You know, so there's a real question of who pays to have the work preserved. I mean, does the artist, is the artist alive? You know, this can be a big expense. So, you know, so it was, you know, it was at a certain point, my curatorial efforts, I realized, were really going to be intertwined inevitably with preservation. The other thing that I want to just begin talking about, and we can come back to this later, is I had been a curator for about 10, 12 years at Hall Walls in Buffalo in the 80s. And so I was a contemporary arts curator. And then when I was invited to do this project of the early video art, this was a period that I was not involved with video. I didn't really know that work so much, more by reputation, but so I had to do a lot of research. And I also realized very early on that I had to talk to the artists. I really had to talk to the artists to see what informed their making at that time. Now, I had studied with Steina and Woody, so I had some insight into their work and what they were interested in talking about and emphasizing. But there were plenty of other artists because, you know, there was one program that was kind of about that tribe, the tribe that worshipped electricity, you know. But there were also other artists that, you know, people that were doing performance, people that were doing more like community media art, you know, that kind of thing. So I really had to talk to people about what inspired and what drove them to make their work. So I found that I did a series of interviews that were really done as research interviews, but they were absolutely critical for helping me to understand what motivated certain artists, and especially like long duration work that, of course, you know, you can't even compare it to today's sense of what duration is. I mean, I was used to how people were working with duration in the 80s. At that point, in the 80s and early 90s. But I mean, especially in the late 60s and early 70s, duration was another issue altogether. So I really had to think a lot about that, and you know, when I was selecting work to include, so I really want to emphasize the importance of talking to the artists, and you know, maybe some of this is like a formal interview. But I can also say that when I did the project that's here, the navigational tool project. Oh, okay. Didn't know. Okay. I wanted to, you know, I mean, I felt pretty confident of what I had mapped out for the, you know, the navigational tool. And again, it's what I said yesterday, you know, having been their student, I knew how important the tools were, so I knew I wanted to talk about that. But I felt that there hadn't been enough attention paid to their archiving impulses. And but I also wanted to double check that with somebody. So I got in touch with Arnold Dreiblad, who's here, who was one of Steina's first students in Buffalo, and whose own work really deals a lot with memory and archiving. And he had traveled with Woody, and he's been friends with Woody and Steina for many years. And I really felt I needed to double check my impulse with somebody else. And that was an incredibly important interview, and I'm happy that Lenka has actually included a version of that interview. Most of it, I think, is going to be in the book that's coming out. What else was I going to say? Yeah, I think that maybe that's fine for now. I mean, I think the other thing, for example, Surveying the First Decade has been distributed to something like, I don't know, 1,500 institutions, like a lot of school libraries have it, university libraries have it, art school libraries have it. And I think this is a really important way. I mean, I think we have to think about the way that works gets to schools, educational institutions, to inform the next generation of artists. I think that's really important. Yeah, and I guess I would just say that the navigational tool that's in the gallery is really an effort to kind of transpose that effort at education to museum visitors or to people who might go to the Vasulka Kitchen Brno website because it's accessible there. So, you know, like I think there should be many places where this information is available because people find their way to artwork in different ways. I mean, sometimes it's through museums, but very oftentimes it's, you know, it's like something that, I mean, again, you know, in Europe, you know, it's a I had students who knew so much about art because there were like all these, you know, like exhibitions that they'd been to, and you know, God, in the United States, you know, we're lucky if we get, you know, this kind of exposure for artists. So, I mean, I think it depends. Every place is different, but people find art in different ways, and just again, before I handed the mic over, I think the situation that's happening in the United States is really, really dangerous because the places, the non-for-profits, the Video Data Bank and experimental art, or electronic art cinemix, which have been in existence since the early 70s, they're going to lose. They have already lost some funding, clearly. So you know that safety, that vault of work. God only knows what's going to happen in the next year. So nothing is safe. And actually, the Dutch artist and theoretician really did some amazing writing about preserving work and how, you know, multiple copies are really important. The only way that certain archives actually get saved is because there's a weird copy over here when the fire burned down the library in Alexandria or something like that. I mean, it's just, I would really recommend looking into Chebeventian's writings from the mid-90s about archiving.
I think
Joey?
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to just say, if I could just say, it's just very interesting to me what we've heard so far, also in terms of the importance of these initiatives that are nonprofit, that, you know, are funded through grants, and then also institutions that do have more of a stability. And I think that the Vasulka Chamber project really kind of bridged that and brought, you know, this archive into an institution where there can be this longevity. And I think that kind of cooperation that you're talking about can take place between those platforms. Because I remember when Vasulka Chamber started, you were always saying, and we're doing this project and we want it to be here in 100 years, you know, so yeah. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Joey Heinen.
Yeah, thanks. That's a perfect way to continue some thoughts that I had around, the labor, the resources, the sort of fragility, but the importance of networks. I mean, not just for archiving in general, but in the Vasulka's work and how they always worked in a sort of community-based ethos. I kind of encountered them later on. I was a college student in the mid-2000s and learned about them in an alternative media class and immediately fell in love with their work. And so it was in grad school at New York University's Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program, same program that Siga graduated from, that my advisor, Mona Jimenez, who has a background in video work and was part of that kind of upstate New York experimental television center scene, learned that, you know, they had their materials in their home and studio. And of course, there have been all these great archiving projects in the past that are still around. And, you know, of course, we have ZKM here. We have Electronic Arts Intermix, like we mentioned. You know, experiences at Ars Electronica. And then I believe it was through the Langlois Foundation that they were able to fund the mass digitization that's now on vasulka.org, which, does anyone know who hosts that website currently?
It's in Santa Fe, and we are in communication. We will, you know, eventually Vasulka Foundation will be the one that takes care of it.
Oh, good. Okay.
We have Steina's nephew who's a computer guy
Excellent.
who's helping me with this.
Yeah, so just
Vasulka Foundation.
there we go. So on the topic of continuity, that's always wonderful to hear. Yeah, which of course is like often pointed to as like such a great example of an artist's archive that's been in existence. And so when I was doing work with them in the middle of my graduate program in 2013 in Santa Fe, that's when I really first came in immediate contact with the luxury of their archive, which we've heard talk about, and how generous they are. They were very generous in allowing me, a graduate student who didn't yet totally know what I was doing, to start to help them grapple with what to do with all this material that hadn't been dealt with in the past, all the sort of tapes of behind the scenes development processes and the sketches and things that maybe didn't end up in sort of the final works. Like we've also heard about that there's not just the iterations of the works that we experience in the galleries, but the iterative process of how they made work, and the activity that Steina was talking about in the video clip that Jennifer showed earlier. So, it's, I think, another layer to this is, and I'm maybe speaking kind of selfishly from my vantage point of what interests me about their work, is just how did they do it, and how did they discover. And Lenka brought this up yesterday with the Brotherhood, where there was a lot of their work that was pushing against what technology was intended to do. And so how do you stabilize that idea when it sort of stands outside of the sort of expected frameworks of how technology is managed? So those are all really, really important issues to grapple with. I feel like the biggest one I was dealing with was just figuring out how do all of these existing efforts build off of each other, and that we're not duplicating work. Of course, duplication is another important layer of this, and how do we make sure that it's not just in one place, but how does that knowledge speak in one kind of consolidated way? And of course, I think the relationships that are so strong in this community is one major way that happens. I mean, just the intention and value in relationship is I think what makes this all happen. But yeah, I guess the other thing, because I was gonna, or I guess I'm expected to talk a little bit about the Brotherhood, which was just kind of maybe the most engrossing project that I did with them, which was, in digging through the archive, which I should say my main objective in that summer was to bring tapes to Boulder to be digitized, and then also to, as I was saying, look at the existing work that had already been done and identify gaps and figure out what hadn't been yet dealt with. But I came across a CDR that just said Unicom on it, and I had not yet fully delved into the Brotherhood enough to know what that could mean, but quickly found a zip file with thousands and thousands of scripts on it, and that then kind of prompted a exploration of all these documents that I found kind of loosely scattered throughout the studio that all kind of dealt with different names that I was seeing throughout these scripts, and then through successive interviews in their kitchen, the actual kitchen in their house, every afternoon, that we started to kind of piece together not just the Brotherhood, but the sort of development process of many pieces throughout their work. And we're able to bring Russ Gritzo in for an interview. And so I spent the next year of my thesis trying to sort of identify the iterative process of making that work and the ways in which it, because it was in development for almost a decade and went from lattice C to a sort of adapted version of C to now what I understand in the Berg installation is an Objective C kind of model, but then also went from DOS to Linux to Unix and went from single iterations to a networked version. And so it was all of these different experiments that were kind of tracked along with the progression of open source kind of ethos in software development. And so just looking at how interesting their collection is when you compare it against the sort of history of creative technological development. And again, touching on what Lenka mentioned about the sort of process of making a piece that was designing behaviors that weren't expected, that sometimes were accidental, How do you carry that forward? And just given how bespoke the piece is, especially with all the robotic material that they found at Los Alamos, how essential all of that was going to be. In software preservation, emulation is a big strategy people talk about, but in such bespoke hardware environments, that's one of the hardest things to carry forth, which is why I was not confident when I heard there was a project to restage it that it could happen. And yesterday I mentioned something around, preservation is also kind of a speculative process because you don't know what solutions are going to come down the road, and you kind of rely on this invisible community of makers and tinkerers and hobbyists out there that are always working on weird little solutions that you aren't sure are going to be coming along. And so, in recent years, software programs like Touch Designer have emerged. And from what I understand, the way that Bob O'Kane, who some of you may know, who was the main technologist that they hired at Berg for the reinstall, was able to kind of, he had to rewrite the device drivers that I understand, but there was a new kind of ability to have that hardware-software communication happen via a program like Touch Designer. In the same way that emulators for various software programs can obsolesce themselves, there can sometimes be better solutions in the future. So it's kind of an interesting process of looking forward and backward and hoping, that we can kind of keep an understanding of what the original intent was and how it was designed, and how that informs our understanding of how to carry it forward, with the hope that there are still going to be new ways of approaching it in the future. And like Gabby said, like, preservation's a constant activity. So not that this, I put in a lot of very challenging kind of ideas into one long speech, but to just say that for me the biggest thing going forward, and that I've been constantly trying to think about, is like, what are the opportunities for kind of having that knowledge kind of merge in a way that allows for this to happen in ever expansive ways. I guess I'll kind of stop there because I've said enough, I think, but thank you.
I just want to say, wow, how wonderful is this to be able to sit together here and discuss this, and also having the artist here. It's just an honor. So I just wanted to use the opportunity as well, because I have you all here by the table, to thank you for the wonderful day yesterday. And I was asked to talk about collaboration across institutions. And what I started to think about is, at least in how I view it, is maybe 15, 20 years ago and before that, there were these silos, at least here in Iceland. So everyone was kind of preserving their thing. They were not talking together. We in Iceland sometimes talk about small kings, little kongar, who oversee their own domains and are hoarding basically their information. But I think in the last couple of years that has changed so much, and I think just this, with us sitting here at this table speaking together, it talks so much about that. I want to come into some of the things that have been developing over the last few years. We have a thing called the Center for Digital Humanities and Arts, which the Reykjavik Art Museum is a part of, and the National Gallery, the National Archives, the city museums, and so on. And what this entity is trying to do is it's trying to create new ways of preserving materials, new databases, looking into new like all kinds of things that can help these institutions in preservation, in mediation, and things like that. And a couple of years ago, this wouldn't have been a possibility. So I'm just so happy that we're able to be doing that. Also, there's an entity called Sarpur here in Iceland, which is a collective collections management system. I don't think that's it's in a couple of countries as well, like Denmark and other countries. At all the museums, all except the Reykjavik Art Museum here in Iceland, at least, I'm looking, is a part of this collective management system. And it is such a great collaboration tool because you can have information open, readily available. You go into the back end and you can look up all the works by, for instance, Steina and the Vasulkas and see what's available in all of the museums. It's not much outside of our museum and the Reykjavik, the National Gallery at the moment, but for other artists and for other entities, it's quite a lot. And these platforms are so valuable. Yeah, she's putting up. So yeah, we're getting a new one. This is the front end of it. You can put in Vasulka maybe. Yeah, that would be good. Then we can see the works that are at least in the collection of the National Gallery. So this is just the front end. So this is what the public can see. So they can find a lot of, and we're getting a new one. That's why it's so slow. What they can see, so they can see basic information about it and everything. But for researchers and for the people who are working in the museums, there's a lot more information that they can glean and they can use in their collaborative efforts. And I just wanted to also talk about what Joey mentioned with the tinkerers and these small communities. That it's so important for the museums to collaborate with them as well. For instance, we got one of these tinkerers just this morning because we were trying to work out a kink with All Vision, and it's so important to collect the information about these persons as well. And to share this information. So everyone is not looking for the tinkerer. Like we were calling everyone in a bit of a panic yesterday because way A, B, and C had failed. So we're in way D now, but hopefully we'll get it up and running. There are maybe a few things here that I want. Yeah. In 2017, when me and Markus were hired to the Reykjavik Art Museum, we started looking into the new media at the Reykjavik Art Museum. And what we realized is that the documentation was not very well done. It was very sparse, and it needed to be completely reworked. So we created a collaboration between the exhibition department and the collection department, and there we created exhibitions which were called Bout, and we decided to show most, if not almost all, of the new media works that we had in the collection in these exhibitions. But what we did as well is that we started a collaboration with other institutions. We gathered information about the works from them, but there was also a collaboration with the artists. So we kind of did live documentations events. So we invited 2 artists at a time. And it was a live event like we had yesterday, and there was a talk with the artists where we were gathering information, and we also got experts and people who were interested in this coming to the event, and they asked questions that we maybe hadn't thought of, and then we also sent them documentation papers after the event. So we kind of got a very full-rounded information about each works, and we filled up a huge gap that was in the documentation in the collection. And I think but this is something that is important to continue. I don't think we've ever completely completed documentation. It's an ongoing thing, of course, but I think this was an instance of a good idea and a great step towards getting more information. I think that's all I wanted to say. I think I've gone through my list so far, but I'm looking forward to there being more discussions. So there are so many experts here at the table. Yeah.
Thank you. Ari, would you like to say something? Okay, so thank you very much. I think it's really interesting how we've gone really from this, independent or I would say, I'm trying to go from institutional, the difference between institutional and kind of these funded projects that don't, have a lot of security in terms of. But something that came up for me was really how this approach that in the first clip I showed with Steina, talking about how they were comfortable in these alternative cultural environments, and then also the how to approach showing the work in the institution. I think it's interesting how the work really forces us to remain in this open source DIY kind of area where, we have to be in touch with people who know the technology or who are, say, younger people who are able to work with new solutions for the technology. There's a lot of questions also in terms of access to the work. And that was something that Gabi brought up that I thought maybe we could talk a little bit more now about. The theme that we chose was ethics of preservation. And I know that there's a lot of good work that's taken place with the digital canon, for example, and that approach. I'm curious to know if we could, or to open up the floor to all of our participants and talk a little bit about access. Chris's piece, of course, assumes a certain access to the videos and to be able to understand the work and to really traverse the mediascape, the Vasulka mediascape. And I was wondering, maybe, Christine, if you could speak a little bit about some of the strategies for access for the future, since it does seem to be such an important part of the Vasulka legacy, and then also the education. And as so many of us here have already expressed, that the way that we became introduced to the Vasulka's work was through school or, having access to that work.
So what, like the...
What are some of the institutional solutions for the future for having access to the work?
Well, that's something, of course, we're just like working with at the moment, how kind of with, the people who are here with us, because of course you can find the Vasulka archives in many places. So having like this conversation, how we can always work together. And when in 2011, when me and Steina and Woody and Haldabert started to talk about the possibility of having Vasulka Chamber, was also this future idea of having some kind of a place where it would be like maybe an umbrella or something like for the other institutions to work with. And that's what we started out with. And thankfully, that was a possibility when we got the funding. So in that case, I want to just, say how brave Haldabjörn was to take this project on, because it was a project that had no funding at that time. So I was currently then working in Nordic House, and I decided to leave my job without a secure job. So I think I was also quite brave with 4 kids, and but that I felt like this was so meant to be, and I trusted, like I always do, my intuition. And Haldabjörn, he kind of gave me like a part-time job to start with, to find money to make the Vasulka Chamber happen. And then, of course, through EEA funds, we started to go to Czech Republic, because for me it was very important, because of Woody's, he was from Brno. We could not just, even if he had an Icelandic passport, we're very proud of it. Our Timotheus Peterson, but he's also, he has also, of course, a big presence in Brno, and had for many, many, many years. And then we met Thomas Ruller and Jennifer during this Norwegian EEA funding meeting in Prague, where there was only, 5 Icelandic people and 40 Norwegians, and they really made us feel like they were, giving us this trip, because they, of course, put most of the money into the EEA funding system. But we made contact, and of course, when we were telling Jennifer and Thomas about this idea of making this Vasulka Chamber in the National Gallery of Iceland, which is really, like, I think, a big step in making sure, you said 100 years, but for me it was always, we're going to keep it safe for at least 1,000 years. Okay, that was what I said. But and then of course when the funding started to come, it was very much of interest also from Nordic institutions. So we teamed up with our Nordic partners working with digital preservation, and then of course with Lima and many others that I'm probably forgetting. So I could just feel how important it was, and just to say that I'm not the most technical person in the world. So I would always have people with me who would understand it better, because I was maybe the person who was really good at getting funding. That was like, you know, a strength in this project, and also to present it to the Minister of Culture, getting them on board, and it was very hard because they were really. They did not want to promise anything, of course, because we were taking on like a big archive from the United States, because Steina wanted this to come to Iceland. And then that was like a big responsibility for us, for Icelandic people, to make sure this would be okay. So, and then, you know, teaming up with all the institutions, and of course after there was some something happened and it went a little bit downhill. But now, of course, we're back on the track with what is happening here these months, and the National Gallery of Iceland is doing a really good job now with Vasulka Chamber. I'm really, you know, happy with that. But Steina and Woody, of course, had their own Vasulka incorporated in America, which they stopped, you know, maybe 10 years ago. So also we started to talk about how to continue maybe having Vasulka institution or foundation, like we call it now, that would be this umbrella, because maybe it should not be in the National Gallery of Iceland. That should be one of the partners. And then that was created in 2017 and established in 2019 with a meeting with Steina and Woody and her Steina's sister and Haldabjörn. So we were 5 of us talking about this and saying this would be really important. And this should be always an international foundation. So, but this, of course, foundation is like still like being kind of we are making it kind of developing kind of how that kind of function, but of course also getting help from other foundations. Like I've been looking, Gabi has been working with other foundations in Holland, you know, with kind of similar situation of artists that wanted to donate their archive to, you know, certain places. But saying how, you know, how it's going to be in the future is like it's like a river. It's also kind of making its own way. But I think it's really important that Vasulka Foundation in the future will be the guiding light. You know, people that other institutions, artists, curators can look to Vasulka Foundation, and Vasulka Foundation would then be also saying like, this is something for you know, National Gallery of Iceland to answer. This is something for Berg to answer. You know, so we would be kind of the first point in communication, and, you know, helping people continue researching the legacy of the Vasulka's publications. You know, and that's kind of the big aim of that you know, activity of Vasulka Foundation. Did I answer what you asked me? But I mean, yeah, we can get back to that. But I mean, like, we are 5 people, you know, on the board, and it's something that will be just kind of, you know, maybe established more and more with time.
Thank you. I feel like, of course, also thinking about the institution and a lot of the good work that the institutions are doing in terms of preservation and conservation also brings up issues that are associated with certain legalities, and that's something that becomes an issue with access. And so that actually is one of my questions is, you know, what is the strategy for maintaining access, like public access to the works of the Vasulkas? Just simply because, as like Vasulka Kitchen, for example, we get constant requests to be able to view the work. And at the moment, it feels like there isn't access to it. And so, of course, I understand that there's a lot of respect that has to be honored in terms of how the work is dealt with afterwards in an institutional context. And so I feel like there's kind of like this slight disconnect. And I'm wondering, how do you bridge that disconnect? And I don't know, Joe, you're working in an institution, and so I'm wondering if there's any cases like that maybe that you could address, or your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I feel like there's also really interesting nuances internationally. Like every place has its own approach towards like copyright, for example, and like privacy and things like that. And this has actually been coming up in conversations because, yeah, as Pari said, I've been in London for some research right now and meeting with people around issues of software preservation, which I shouldn't misstate things about UK copyright, but as I understand it, there's some differences in what constitutes definitions of the work when you are reinterpreting code beyond the original kind of source code, and that it sometimes falls outside of what is considered like what you can legally do. And so that's just one kind of nitpicky thing. And I mean, I could also go on and on about, you know, where my institution is going with, you know, all sorts of new conversations around blockchain and artificial intelligence and all of that, or for creative works, but I don't know if that's exactly what you're getting at. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely conversations around the agents that are acting on behalf of the Vasulkas, and you know, I'm not in an official capacity in that way, and I feel like I'd be interested to hear what everyone else has to say about that. But knowing that there's, you know, that open kind of approach towards the knowledge and wanting it out there, but then of course there's practicalities around how you sustain that and how you know, are able to find some kind of support that does have to rarefy things at a certain point and can't be as open about how things get shared. And then of course there is the aspect of protection around how it's interpreted, how it's, you know, put out into the public realm for those to experience in that way, and what the authorship kind of model is there. Yeah, it's to say I understand that there are reasons why there has to be some control system that exists, but how do you allow it to flow, as I think you were saying, right? That's like a big part of it too. Oh yeah.
Just on this, sorry, but I think that would be also really interesting for us to hear from the National Gallery of Iceland and the Vasulka Chamber. You know, how is that going to develop? Because that, of course, went a little bit kind of, it stopped a little bit when I left the institution, but I know it's been like, it's now we got PhD students working on it, but that was always the idea that should be online. This should be even part of Sarpur, everything that was donated. That was like one of the first ideas, so it would be really interesting to hear what your plans are. Of course, with the artwork, I mean, everybody can ask for an access through Bad Contemporary. That's not like hard to do. So you could always just, you know, send onwards emails to the curators or the people who want to look at the work. So I know that's easy access. But of course, the website, vasulka.org, should also be fixed, and we've been talking about that for years, that there was always a possibility to see the artwork there, and I know Steina would like that, so that's something that we would hopefully, you know, with Eggert and other people in the foundation work on, and we've been actually talking about it a lot, but this is of course a question of time and finance, but that's something that we are, you know, planning.
I can say a little bit about that, and Dagny, who's head of, is he here? Yeah. Who's head of registration and the collection at the National Gallery. We have been talking a lot these last several months when we've been planning the exhibition, and also just looking at the website where you can link to the Vasulka Chamber. We've been talking about putting more information on Sarpur, for example, some of the research and the labels related to this current exhibition, and then we're having installation photographs taken tomorrow, so we will also put the works from our collection there. So just ways to expand the website, and also how to use Sarpur to get more information about the works in our collection online. We also, working with Sigga Regina, who's, you know, very good at this, we've been, we will now have look at the instructions for our works, and I will love to hear from you more about Lilith. but instructions, but also iterations. We now have a draft of an iteration report so that when anything goes on loan, we will ask for documentation and a full report, and then and also photo documentation so we can keep a record of that, and just what more we can do without funding, really, is the stuff that we can do with the facilities we have to better beef up the documentation for open access through our open access website and software. Dagny, do you want to say anything more about that?
No, maybe about the archive. We are now going into new chapters. Regarding the archive, the Sarper now that we are using is only for the artworks, not for the archive. And there is some registration of the archive already, but hopefully we can, when we have this new Sarper, a new management system, that we can then like transfer the information into that new system. We are not started to do that. We are just working with the information we have now and moving them into this new system. But hopefully we will look into that next year.
Just add a little bit to this. Now, just to add to this, I think it's so great to be talking here because I feel this is very complicated but very interesting. And what you said, Christine, that now you were looking into putting the website, so upgrading the website, which I think it's an incredible tool. And that is really the center point where you go to kind of explore and get information. So I think it's also important that the people under the umbrella are kind of talking to each other about who is doing what, so that we are not spending our resources so we are spending our resources in a useful way where we are supporting each other and doing it because it is just all a matter of money and time and how we can kind of make the most use of all our time and money.
Let's see how to bridge this one. I had the impression Vasulka Kitchen had already developed an archival system. Yeah. So maybe, I have no idea if you are having conversations about this and if there's an opportunity using that one. The other thing, and it's also very positive, we're starting to do new applications together. That was it took a while, but we're there yet now again. So that's great. But I wanted to point out that Vasulka Kitchen did some archival research. Dushan did it? Maybe you can talk a bit more about it. Talking about access.
Okay. So when Vasulka Kitchen was founded, we were able to go to the city of Brno. We had tried for many years together with Woody and Steina to create a kind of institute or media archive at the University of Technology in Brno. And we really couldn't get any traction. But as soon as Vasulka Chamber came into existence, I had also noticed that an acquaintance of mine had gone to the city and had asked to create some kind of public sculpture that was something that was an expat or someone who had immigrated to Sweden, a scientist, and wanted to do this project. And I thought, oh, if I come to the city, they always hear, if it's someone who's very famous, who's from the city, they'll start to listen. So, having Vasulka Chamber behind us saying, look, this project has been done, this project is possible, it's feasible, we can implement this here. We were just very lucky. And at the time, kind of the political situation as well was very congenial to doing like these cultural projects. And so we were able to get that support and able to create the project. So of course, in order for the city to be interested in us doing something like that, we had to show that we had something in hand. And Woody and Steina were always, as Chris had mentioned, very generous with their archive. We had copies of the archive that was given to us so that we could show that material to students as part of the curriculum. Lenka had been given the archive as part of her, to be able to do her research. And so we were able to say, well, we have this archive that, we can have as a foundation for our project. And then we were graciously given the opportunity to also create several of Woody's prints from Lucifer's commission and from the Triads series. And so we do have a few of those prints that are part of our fund. And so over the last 4 years, having this archive, we were able to get funding during these different rounds of programs that were about digitalization. So it's interesting that this is a focus of funding for the European Union, also for the Ministry of Culture in the Czech Republic. And so having that funding, we were able to really go into the archive in a way where we could be more systematic about it, and then using a lot of the very important knowledge that we were able to access through Lima, through the National Film Archive in Prague, who had already developed a methodology for creating a taxonomy of these works. And so that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years. But, that said, who can have access to this? Some of it is online, but of course, I feel very intimidated as a nonprofit, as an independent entity, knowing that, of course, there are very important, as I mentioned, legalities, institutions that are involved in this process. And so, that's a really important conversation to have. That's why we're here. Okay.
Open it up to some questions from around the table.
Arnold wanted to say something. Oh, yes. Yeah, I think so. I'm going to give the mic to Arnold, and then we did have, talking about digital strategies and archival futures. So we can open it up and then move that into that territory.
No, let's.
Yes, thank you. A few things, and listening to this very interesting conversation. I've worked on a number of different legacies as an artist and also as archival and curatorial work. The artist Terry Fox from the States involved with a retrospective exhibition I co-curated, working with many archives and also in relation to Black Mountain College, a number of projects. And, I do sense something that also Christine said that I think is very important, that there really is a need for one central conduit, information conduit that would at least collect information and share information about where everything is. So worldwide, in all iterations, including all media, paper, video, informational installation, et cetera. And that leads me to the second point. I think it goes back very much to Chris's talk about not to forget, even, times have changed, but not to forget the approach of the Vasulkas, and I think of the Vasulkas as like kind of the Big Bang, the beginning, and their work together, and then, of course, following their individual trajectories, which should all be respected within this cosmos. But again, to maybe repeat, but I think they saw themselves as kind of pulling along with themselves what you call the tribe, but a collective community of like-minded, interested artists. And so, and they did collect. There was a very large archive of work from that period, and that creates context. So that's something to think about in the future. And then another aspect which came up in various ways yesterday, there was this term used, tools, and it was interesting because I talked to a young art historian yesterday, and it's like it's not really in the lingo anymore, and it comes from the 60s and 70s, kind of comes from the Whole Earth catalog, and we would say, what, tech now, or tinkerer, or makers, and all this, yeah. But I think it was somehow alluded to yesterday that in the early years that what they called the machines, or what Woody some later called the protagonists, or they saw them as collaborators, and all these quirks in the machines and things that would happen, that dialogue with the machines and the people that made the machines or helped them develop the machines were also part of this community, and that way of working does not really fit into art historical discourse, yeah, or categories. Still now, so in fact, in this thinking about the archive, so art historical categories or curatorial categories think of the work, and we've already spoken about in the beginning today about the problems of looking at installations in different ways that works are shown, and Steina talking about, which I know very much as an artist, that you have to set in stone before, because these are institutions, they need to budget the money, they need to see how many people are going to help, how it's installed, but actually you just want to go in and kind of play with, see where different ways it could work, and that's one issue, but I think that in a sense, if one could kind of think out of the box in those kind of conventional categories, to try to somehow include that dialogue with the machine, which is so much a part of their work, however one defines that now. And of course it changed, as the work went into digital and morphed, but it continued, all through that work, and not to forget that. And then another point, what you made about access. So this is a complicated issue, and which also, there are certain categories in the way that the art world works, and I think it's interesting that it came up, because it's very much my legacy from the early years that the Vasulka is, instilled in me a very strong anti-art market sense, which I had to reflect upon later, so it's not to be sneezed about that, the irony that of course it ends up in museums, because where is it going to end up years later, and galleries, but I think that that one has to try to think about this openness. I mean, I think Steina and Woody gave me their entire collection twice, first on VHS and then later digitally. And so there was, as Chris mentioned, this sense of sharing and of community. And what's today, we have, of course, dialogue in the art world about collectivity. This is very interesting that it comes from this other time in a very different context than it's thought of today. Yeah, I think that in that sense of how it's shared, of course, one does recognize that, in their later years, they needed the support of, the financial support of art money, that it was necessary. So one should, when one looks at it, one has to recognize that aspect also, that it, became biographically important. So, but if you think of, like, if we're only thinking of showing tapes, is that really enough? I mean, that's a part of it, as art historians can analyze visually what's happening, but there's a whole other thing that's happening, and which happens, a whole other discussion, and in fact, in talking about access, that should be accessible too. That's maybe easier to make accessible, but one would need to research and collect that. So those are just some ideas. Let's go to the foundation.
Thanks. Because you were saying that there was a need for like a landing page where you can find all of the resources about the Vasulkas, and I think that's sort of the idea behind the Vasulka Foundation webpage, which currently doesn't exist. But the plan was that it would sort of link to all of the, like the Vasulka Kitchen and so on, and it would well, first it would link to, currently it redirects to Vasulka.org, but it would gradually take over that page because the page itself is in itself a piece of art. But one thing I think we should also do with that page is sort of to have a larger archive, not just of their work, but also work about their work, like research papers and also like Bob, what's his name? Bocane, yeah. Like his work in restoring the Brotherhood and so on. There's a lot of work that's in there that only he knows, and that's something that definitely should be archived. And I would see the Vasulka Foundation page as a perfect place for that.
So we could open up for questions. Two of the themes that we also had as part of today's discussion were digital strategies and archival futures. Maybe before we open up for questions, maybe it would be interesting to think about, since we're talking about iterations, we're thinking about that in terms of how the works have been shown in different contexts in different institutions. But then we also do have the question of single channel video. And the Vasulkas did an amazing job of transferring their work from these analog media to these digitized versions of their works. And, there have been, some talk about things like remastering work. And I was wondering if we could open that discussion and think about what that means, or if that's something that it seems has been important for Steina to create a kind of correct version of these works. And I wonder what that means also for all of these other versions that exist in these other archives that are incredibly interesting as versions. So would you like to say something?
Yeah, this is a big issue. And I know Steina has so many times maybe been disappointed that the copies that are being shown is not the copies she wants to be, the last, or not even maybe the last, because she's always working on them. So, I of course don't have an answer, but I think for me, I think it should be always the artist decides. But then does it mean that it has to be transferred to all the institutions that bought the copy, like Whitney Museum? Buying, do we need to then give them new copies? So this is something that I think needs to also be solved very soon, because we don't have all the time in the world. But for me as an artist first, and then maybe a museum director, I think it should always be the artist deciding what copy is being shown. Not the copy that was. Of course, if it has been changed drastically, it's maybe another question and another conversation. But if it's the same work and has been like remastered or worked on by Steina and her team, for me that's kind of obvious that should be the copy that should be shown. But I don't know who wants to take from me.
I can just redirect. I think it's really interesting thinking about the video that I showed, where Steina is actually saying that, she didn't do a premiere of her work, that, she sort of snuck them in the back door, and there's also this work, and that they are being worked on, and that they are being, updated, or current versions, or rethinkings, and also in terms of, how what you were saying about using latest technology, or what can we do with that? And this wasn't part of this interview, but in another interview, and I think it's also in that series done by Davidson and Dubbins. Steina says, you come into the institution and they want it exactly prescribed, and I think it's a kiss of death. So, yeah, important. But, how can you, what you were saying about the work that has been purchased and that is part of the collection, it's a mammoth task. Yeah. To be able to work that way. And I think that we're talking about, some kind of like centralized place to look to for that kind of information, and I think the foundation is a really important part of that puzzle. Yeah. Anyone else? Joey?
Yeah, so I was just kind of also curious to hear more about, well, you had mentioned a taxonomy that had been developed, and I feel like that's often kind of the hardest part with these federated projects, is agreeing upon core data nomenclature and descriptions for things. I think that was like when I was in the tape cellar, just grappling with all the generations of things and the legacy of what had been given around and what it was associated with, because of course things were sometimes originally on half-inch open reel and then would get remastered to U-matic, or sometimes originally on U-matic and then to Betacam, and so on and so forth. So that was always a tricky thing to kind of suss out, is, you know, that sort of process of migration that happened in an analog way before it was then digital. But yeah, I'm kind of curious with the foundation, if there's conversations around like linked data approaches. There's like a few projects like the Artist Archives Initiative that has kind of like a model around unifying knowledge around one artist that also can kind of stem out to collaborators and things like that. Or I've heard of like a platform, Research Space, is like intended to kind of do that. So yeah, I was just curious to hear more about like, well, the taxonomy first, but if there's ideas around kind of how the data might kind of be in conversation with each other across with the foundation.
It's yeah. I think it's something that we will just develop in the next few months. And I mean, this is, of course, we have worked together. This is not like our first. Many of us have been in communication for many years. But I think now we have like reached the point where, you know, there's really a line in the sand, and we have to kind of continue. And I mean, I'm now the manager of Vasulka Foundation. So, but I'm stepping aside, so we will have someone else, but I will be, of course, involved in another way. So we're just hoping that we will get someone really with time to kind of develop it really, like, you know, better from, you know, early next year. So that's also something that I think Vasulka Foundation should definitely be part of applications in the European Union, like the, you know, culture applications, to have funding to employ more people to do this properly. So that's kind of where we are at now.
Yeah, it's interesting. My first real introduction to things like taxonomy or databases or how they are organized, or even on a technological level, were really at the symposiums that Lima does every year on media archiving and preservation. And that's an incredible world that I know you belong to, and taking like a dive into that, trying to think about some of our archival strategies, brought me to places like Resource Space. I think the interesting thing about Resource Space is that it's open access in terms of the code. So, you know, you can implement that on your systems, and it has a lot of things that you can do to work with the media data files themselves. But yeah, that's a big question, and I think that especially for having someone who's an expert, that's something that I think that an institution can afford to have as an employee or as a department, and that's something that's a lot more difficult for a smaller operation to do. And so for us, it was important to be able to, you know, to have partnerships with institutions like the National Film Archive, or even our long on-standing dialogue with Lima, for example.
Research Space, right? Not Resource Space.
There's
two.
There's Research Space.
Yeah, cool. Just want to make sure.
I have a question, actually, really briefly, sorry. I wanted to ask, because there is a lot of, it was mainly introduced by you, this aspect, this difference between access and accessibility. And I mean, we're in a room right now where not possibly, 100%, you are all so within Steina's and the Vasulka's practice, but then at the same time, I feel like sometimes it's taken for granted with general audiences, and I mean, I have encountered for the first time Steina's work at Ravenrow in 2016, and I was mind blown. And still being here now and encountering the work is something that I'm overwhelmed, especially coming up with the fact that we're hosting the exhibition in Munich in a few months as well. So my question is that how does this aspect of open source and P2P, and this is why also I wanted yesterday to expand a bit more on the Second Life aspect and how Steina has been since the 80s seeing machine as a co-performer or a co-author in the work, or with Ruud and Edra, both of the Vasulkas, they were also bringing that a lot into their work. So how, and since working with Second Life was kind of like a proposal for a living archive, this aspect of open source, P2P, co-authored, no institutional gatekeeping. Why, and combining with what Kirsten said, of Steina needs to have the last word on which version of the work is the work that represents her more, then why doesn't the Vasulka archive kind of like follow what Second Life could have been by employing not only human but also non-human agents? Because right now, and I mean, I'm not going to be that person, but apparently I am, like there are so many AI agents that can be developed with like a very humanistic input. We have reached the level that we can train. So why couldn't an AI agent contribute to the living archive of the Vasulkas, following what the Second Life could have been, this P2P exchange of a living archive? That's my question. Sorry for the long.
It's hard to answer. But I think there's so many possibilities. I mean, and of course, Steina and Udi have always been so interested in what the future will bring. So I don't know what to say really.
No, I think that what you're speaking about, I think that of course a very big issue is you're talking about working with a data set, and that data set belongs to someone or belongs to more people. There's so it's how do you work with that aspect of it? And there was a research project that did take place at Maastricht University. Someone from Vasulka, about this project, at Vasulka Kitchen, who it's called Vasulka Live Archive. This was also done in cooperation with Dusan Barok, who was a longtime collaborator with Lima, and it did use our archive as a data set to do a kind of AI research into the Vasulka's work. So that I think is a very interesting opportunity. I think Woody would be excited about that kind of opportunity, with new technology and artificial intelligence. And one of the quotes, I think it was Lenka's presentation, there was a quote about artificial intelligence. And I think that that's a great prompt for Vasulka Foundation to think about and to, whether that will be possible. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add to all the talk about artificial intelligence, I just started my PhD studies here at the University of Iceland, and I will work in cooperation with National Gallery of Iceland, and the idea is to develop AI prototype tool, large language model, that would then afterwards serve as some sort of like a tool that could potentially help visitors to interact with the artworks of Steina. The idea is to train the model like on 5 to 10 works of, like, as we all know here, like there is a lot of information and yeah, just like a massive archive that is fantastic for training these kind of tools. And then in my research, like my main interest is to see like what this tool could do in terms of interpretation. Does it help? Does it distract the visitor? Like what are these possible, like, yeah, what does this mean for the visitor? more. But there is, of course, like huge potential in the overall archive when it comes to artificial intelligence. Yeah.
My name is Margit Rosen. I come from ZKM, Center for Art and Media, and I took a lot of notes. But I try to be brief. Just to let you know, like we had a big project with Steina and Vodi many years ago, 2006-7 Mindframes, and digitized I think more than 800 tapes. And we are a little bit part of the conversation, so if things happen, we get a lot of requests and we can help. And I would be very happy if we would be even more part of that conversation. We couldn't join an application, a shared application, European Union, because we were already involved with others. And also, why we would like to be more part is because we also have some archives which are of the context, like Gerald O'Grady and Michael Saup, by the way, who would be very happy to restage Hyena. And hello from Michael. Yeah. Just one remark about the networks. We had in February a big conference called New Media Art Archives, where we had really from all continents people, because we are all scarce of resources, we have little visibility, and we have totally different problems from, or not totally, some major problems different from other archives. And so we just handed in a EU application to create the tools which then all new media archives might use. So we don't know if we'll get that, but if that, it would be great that, Gabi knows about the project a little bit, and we also had an application for AI, because through our laboratory for antique video systems, we have 20,000 tapes digitized, but we don't have the manpower to do all the proper inventory, and a few things could be done automatically, like text to text, speech to text, and so on. The tools are all there, but not for the poor public institutions. We can't pay, and also we have copyright issues. We don't want to hand it over to Amazon or other services. So, but all that application is not yet there. And about accessibility, at the moment we answer individual requests, mostly from colleagues, also from students. And we plan to put all the metadata of our archives out there, but there we have a problem specifically also with the video archives, because a lot of colleagues said, you just put it out quick and dirty. And we have some experience with that. Partially it works because then people get upset and send us in the right information. But the problem is this false information spreads so quickly on the web and we can't get it back out, even if after that we put in the right information. So probably that were the short points, and I'm very happy to meet you all here.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag again the Center for Digital Humanities and the Arts for the locals, and especially for the foundation and the PhD researchers, that there is options of funding, because there has been some prerequisites met for national funding pipelines, and especially for something that could enable collaboration and more institutions to work together. And I think this AI model idea would be something that the center would very much like to look into and think about. So I just wanted to flag that for the locals.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we can open up for questions if there's another specific question. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left. So yeah, I was going to actually ask you. I was going to say, would you like to chime in?
Thank you very much, and thank you all for a wonderful morning. And the day yesterday, I'm Markus Andresson, director of the Reykjavík Art Museum. recently appointed to the position of Count Dracula, who will now provide the kiss of death to so many artworks. I thought that was a wonderful story. Thank you. Maybe. But as that person or in that role, I also have to take up defense for our practice as you know, preservers, as museums. I mean, we have so many rules and regulations and ethics that have been pinpointed to and handed down to us throughout the centuries that we definitely have to respect. And when it comes to works in our preservation and our collections, there is just so much responsibility, and we have to tread lightly. Of course, it's always wonderful to have the artists and have the access to them and talk to them about what would be the best possible way to preserve their legacy. But perhaps there is a limit to what is possible to do. I just have to iterate that. I mean, we are working in the Reykjavik Art Museum with a painter, Erro, who is obsessed with the idea of copying the image and you know, erasing the original. And in recent years, he developed, or he discovered digital prints. So he is reprinting all his works on canvas and sending it to us, and we're just like, what? What should we do with this? But you know, it's also we are in the role of being in this institutional responsible role, and of course artists will tease us and they will kick us in the butt all the time. This is just the role of the artist. You know, they're never going to be happy with the institution. They're always going to poke it. And that goes for painters and video artists and everybody, and we know that. So we're in it for that game, of course. But also we have to stand on our what should I say, responsibilities. Working with an artist many years ago, we were preserving a certain piece in the collection, and the person insisted that we need to make a bronze copy of that work. I mean, of course, that would be wonderful, but we're changing the work entirely. I have done so many retrospectives of painters in recent years, and they come in with their palette, and you know, they just go on the paintings, they just start, no. Okay, fine if it's somebody else who owns the piece, but if it's our piece in the collection, don't do it. You have to, there's protocols. So I just wanted to voice this because it's a big element for the institution. And I know it's debatable, but it's something we have to mention.
And let's not forget all the restrictions in presentations, where many of these works had this free exploration and presentations, where now also in many museums and institutions, lots of things are not possible anymore because of all kinds of regulations.
Yeah, I think that was part of the idea also with this discussion today, is to really think about this amazing territory that the Vasulkas created through their approach and through their generosity and through their sharing, and then also seeing the work being shown in institutions. And as I already mentioned, this is something that has to be respected, and there are of course legalities that are a part of that. And so it's an important moment to think about, how, as someone mentioned, gatekeeping, how can we have a different approach that's not gatekeeping, but that it's, shepherding, and that it's also in consideration, and I think I have this written down here, in consideration of the historical approach of the artist. And of course, that can change, and, people can change their politics, they can change their opinions as they move forward. And that's also, I think, important, what Chris was mentioning, the importance of the interview, and thinking about what is it today, and how can we honor the legacy, and how can we also fit into these sometimes very rigid rules that are part of the institution. So thank you for that comment.
4 minutes left. We got 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Yeah. Any other questions or comments to make? Yes. Anyone? Yeah. I thought she was aiming it. Yeah.
It's just because you were talking about this, the role of the institution in freezing things in time or not, or allowing things to develop. Because I think maybe there's a point here that we sometimes think about, which is, is the role of the art museum to show something, that is now, or, because if it has been collected and there's, painting that, or a piece by Steina, when we are displaying it, are we showing history, or, does history compete with art, I mean, is it the role of the curator to decide whether they are showing a historical context and teaching us about art history as well, or does that clash with sometimes showing artwork? My thoughts. I didn't really word it before, but Anybody want to answer my question?
Maybe just to add to this, because we are preserving paintings, and we have now paintings from the 16th century that are in very bad shape, and we will have to decide where we stop and what we will do, and where we are cleaning, and where we are, what line we will take there. And that is something that I've been thinking about with Steina's work, is when is it a new work, and when are we just doing the same as we are with the old paintings that are really in a bad shape, where we are, we have to kind of step in and maybe do what is the line there, and maybe Steina is here as a conservator, So, but that is what I was thinking about. When are we just taking a step too far with the work? When to stop? That is, I feel, the big question that we have really talked a lot about here, but we have not found the answer yet.
Yeah, I know, because for me, when I answer this, the artist is talking, maybe not the woman who works in an institution. While the artist is alive, I always think the artist should have the last say. But of course, after, when they are past, then of course, art historians, curators are going to step in and, of course, trying to honor what the artist had, how that person had worked in their lifetime. But I think for me that should always be the responsibility of the artist to a certain extent, of course.
Yeah, well, one thing that comes up for me in a very large institution that has very regimented roles is, like, in collections care, how do you start to connect with departments in interpretation, education, things like that kind of fulfill that role of what are the decisions that were made for this particular version of it, and how do we connect that to history and the original kind of instantiation of it. And so that just increasingly trying to kind of be involved in that process as a collections care person is something I've been motivated to try to do. This isn't exactly what we're talking about, but there's a really interesting example. I don't know if anyone saw the Rothko paintings at the Harvard Art Museum like a decade ago, I want to say, where I don't know the exact strategy, but the paintings had gone through quite a degree of degradation. And rather than doing physical conservation work, they projected onto the paintings to show you the original, or how they would have looked had they not been so degraded. And then I think at 4 p.m. every day they had a performative moment where they turned off the projectors and it could show an audience how they actually look. And it really kind of also revealed the process of care and what goes into that. And it ended up being kind of every day a moment that people would show up for because they really wanted to see that as an activity. So I feel like it's those kind of interpretive moments that I think can help fill in that kind of gap.
Yeah, great, Joy. I think that's a really great comment. Chris, you want to say something?
Yeah, just one. Yeah, and I'd like to also point out that one of the things that Joey said yesterday was how when he was working on the Brotherhood, that Woody said something about the importance of preserving the curriculum along with the work. And so, and then I would just ask, how much there's the curriculum. We can really talk about the ideas perhaps that Woody had for the Brotherhood, or that Woody and Steina had with the work that they were doing in the 70s together that was, about the signal. But then there's also this larger issue of like what was the social and cultural context in which the work was made. Gabi sort of mentioned that, you know, like as a bit in passing, like this sense of collectivity. And it was interesting because then somebody said, oh yeah, you know, there's this new thing about like people's working collectively now, where there was a difference, it was a related but different sense of collectivity in the past. So I think I can speak only from the United States, but I think we're really in danger of losing the actual history of the 60s and 70s especially, and the role that artist-run spaces played in developing new work. You know, and part of that in the United States had to do with the way funding changed to the mid-90s, and it made it really important. Museums stepped in a way which was important, but it also meant that emerging artists had a much harder time getting funded. So I would encourage us when we think about curriculum to really think very broadly, and I don't, you know, that's a different kind of a collection, although I think, again, Vasulka.org is the example because they saved everything. And you really, if you're interested and you ask questions, what did that mean? What were those spaces like? And start doing a little bit of research. They may not have the answers right at hand for you. The footnotes may not be right there. But I think if researchers ask those questions, then we begin to build that out.
Thank you. I thank you for both those comments. I feel like this performative and unorthodox approach to showing exhibitions and preservation challenges, I think is a really important one. I think that these accompanying programs that are part of exhibitions provide incredible platforms for maybe giving resonance to some of the things that you've been mentioning as well. So I think that that's really good to keep in mind and to also include it as part of you know, something that is more of an institutional presentation of an artist's work, or artists like the Vasulkas who come from this community or artist-run spaces, or even giving platforms to their peers to be part of those programs, which, you know, institutions do, and I think that's good. I want to thank everyone. It's already 12 o'clock. So I want to thank everyone for coming and for this wonderful conversation that we're having. And I'd like to give Pari the opportunity to sort of close our session.
Yeah, I want to thank everyone for coming too. And while I think a lot of important topics were raised, I think the outcome of this meeting is that we have to keep working together and talking together and creating more of these kinds of platforms to make some progress towards you know, better preserving Steina's work and the work of other artists working in all kinds of media. So thank you again, and thank you panelists, and thank you Steina for coming to the colloquium. Thank you for everyone.
It's not so remarkable, and it is already very old news. But when digital came, and we were all against it, it was going to ruin video as culture, and there was this and that, and so digital has this remarkable thing that every copy is as good as the original. And some of you who have been working with this concept for a long time, others have never heard of it and are still saying, is this original or a copy? And of course, I fit into this very well because I don't make things. But Woody doesn't, and Fimboy over there, I don't know how he's going to be able to enter it into library. And there are also so many types of library that we need, like interviews generally are all original until we start changing them. And so there must be some heavy-duty librarians and that understand how to indicate to the consumer that this is not the original version, and this is actually the opposite to what this interviewee was saying. That's what I am kind of looking at from my point of view, so that is simple. But location is totally irrelevant. I mean, we are in Iceland, so it's going to be in Iceland. What's going to be in Iceland? Data. I mean, nothing. Think of water. Or think of another thing that Icelanders did a long time ago, where there was an original and copy, and that are the sagas. You know, if you start reading the sagas and you have a big skinned thing, you are probably dealing with the original, most likely. That's all I wanted to say. We have this now in the background, this idea of copying, changing, making positive things into negative things and so on, and not asking anybody. And in the end, these are all going to be digital libraries in people's homes. It's going to be like water.